Bread, it's a food for hungry men. It's a snack that helps the hunger pass. Hey everybody, I want to talk today about bread. You may be wondering why bread, but hopefully it'll become clear in a moment why I want to talk about bread today. Because bread becomes an important thing in the Christian life. First of all, bread, in general, is just our most basic nourishment. We often hear about, we sometimes use the phrase about bread and water being kind of the basic necessities of life. Bread being our daily bread, our kind of daily basic nourishment. We also, in history of humanity, most cultures, most peoples kind of had some sort of grain and thus turned into some sort of bread that was sort of the main basic fundamental sustenance of their diet. If it wasn't wheat, things like barley or corn. I spent a summer way back in 2011 in Honduras, and they would have corn tortillas with basically every meal. That was their main kind of core fundamental nourishment. Every meal, breakfast, lunch, dinner, also mid-morning snack and mid-afternoon snack, almost always it seemed like they put out their stack of tortillas, that you'd always just have a snack on hand with whatever you were eating. You'd always have tortillas there to eat as part of your meal. So bread is just this, historically this very basic idea, concept of basic nourishment. Now, in the biblical worldview, bread, of course, was the basic nourishment too. In the story of the Passover, you may remember the story in Exodus that the people of Israel were enslaved in Egypt, and then the Lord said that death would be passing over the town, would be passing through the town, so that they had to celebrate the special meal where they sacrificed the lamb and put blood on the doorposts. But also, as part of that meal, they'd roast the lamb and eat it, and the lamb had to be eaten. For the Passover meal, too, they also ate unleavened bread. They were commanded to be unleavened bread because leavened bread being you have to wait for it to rise with the yeast, but unleavened bread being there's no yeast, it's just a flat bread, so that they could eat it as a people in flight, a people on journey. Because as they eat it, they're to remember of the Lord saving them and that they are on journey to that. So it was an unleavened bread, so probably something more like this is a tortilla. So maybe something more along that lines. Not exactly tortilla, but something more flat like that as opposed to a nice sliced bread. So that they were to eat this Passover meal, and then every year they celebrate the Passover meal. Now, I'm not a Jewish scholar, so I'm not going to be able to tell you all the ins and outs of what goes into a Jewish Passover meal. But the basic understanding is that they would do this and that they would remember the saving event of God of the people of Israel. God saving of the people of Israel, bringing them out of Egypt into the promised land, into freedom. And as part of the meal, they would do this as a memorial meal in memory. But in the biblical word of the Jewish remember, to do something in memory of, it wasn't simply to recall a past event, though certainly it is that, but that in somehow doing so and remembering in this special event, that it somehow made present, represented the event that was being recalled. So the saving work of God of the people of Israel was represented when they would have this Passover meal together, where they would eat of this lamb and also eat of unleavened bread. Now, as they continued in the story of the salvation history in the Bible, bread continues to take on a significant importance. Of course, the Passover meal, which is the main covenant meal with God that they would partake in, that would represent the saving work of God. But also, as they traveled through the desert, as we know the story, they wandered through the desert for 40 years. God sustained them by raining down bread from heaven. They called it manna, saying, "What is it?" Some sort of bread substance from heaven. Fast forward, eventually the people of Israel settle into Israel, and they build the temple. And in the temple, there is this idea that the Leviticus law, so this is Leviticus 25 or 1 Kings 21 that talks about this, lays out that there's laws in regards to this special bread, this show bread or holy bread that's to be placed in the temple, in the Holy of Holies, before God. And it could only be eaten by the priest because it was most sacred. That somehow, this bread, by being in the presence of God, somehow was imbued with the holiness, with the very presence of God himself. And if you want to read about the Passover meal, I forgot to mention that's Exodus 12, by the way. The manna in the desert is Exodus 16. So, we have the Passover meal, the manna in the desert, this holy bread in the temple, and then we have Jesus celebrating the Last Supper with his disciples. And this is particularly significant because that's what we celebrate tomorrow night, this Holy Thursday. This Passover meal that Jesus eats with his disciples, which is, by the way, a Passover meal. Jesus says, I desire to celebrate this Passover with you all. So he sits down and he celebrates a Passover meal with them. Now, the Passover meal consisted of this unleavened bread, as was talked about. Also, it consisted of some cups of wine, which there's very much significance. I'm not going to talk about those right now, but if you want to learn more about that, Scott Hahn has a talk called The Fourth Cup or something, where he unpacks the significance of that. So they eat this unleavened bread and the wine. And Jesus takes the bread, of course, as we know, and he says, take this, all of you, and eat of it. This is my body given up for you. Do this in memory of me. Okay, so we do. That's why, especially for Catholic Christians, we celebrate the breaking of the bread every week. Jesus commanded, do this in memory of me. But then this also takes on another layer of meaning, that when the people, when his good Jewish disciples heard this, they would have called to mind the Passover meal, that when we celebrate this, it represents the saving events that were at work. So Jesus is connecting the celebration of this breaking of the bread with his own saving work on the cross. This is my body given up for you. Do this in memory of me. And this memory, as the old Jewish word, isn't merely to recall, though it is that, but also in recalling, it somehow makes present that saving work, the saving presence of God. And that's why, for us as Catholic Christians, this celebration of the Eucharist is so central to what we do. This symbol of bread becomes, for us as we Catholic Christians believes, more than just a symbol. It is a symbol, yes, but when we celebrate it, and when Jesus said, this is my body, that how it makes present his saving work, how we, in the biblical imagination, remember the holy bread in the temple, the bread that rained down from heaven, yes, the manna, but also the holy bread in the temple that was placed in the Holy of Holies in the presence of God and somehow became imbued with his presence, that somehow we believe when we gather together in prayer, the bread itself becomes more than it's a symbol, but in its very essence is changed. For Christ to give himself to us as the bread come down from heaven. As he talks about in John chapter 6. I am the bread from heaven. Unless you eat my flesh, you will not have life within you. And of course, he takes the chalice, the wine, and says, do this in memory of this, the chalice of my blood, which will be poured out for you and for many, for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in memory of me. And so this is what we're preparing to commemorate in a special way tomorrow night, Holy Thursday, what Jesus commemorated. And another layer to this bread, by the way, that during the Mass, the priest holds up the consecrated bread that we believe is Jesus made present, and says, behold the Lamb of God, behold him who takes away the sins of the world. That's interesting that he holds up the bread, and it's broken, by the way, a broken piece of bread, and he says, behold the Lamb of God. I mentioned before how in the Passover meal, eating a lamb was an important piece of that meal, of that covenant meal. You may notice in the meal with Jesus, the Last Supper, nothing is said about the lamb. Why? Because we believe that Jesus becomes the lamb. The lamb is conspicuously absent from the Passover meal Jesus celebrates because he himself is offering himself. He is the lamb. It's by his blood that we are saved. He's the one who frees us from death. And we share in this saving power of Christ on the cross and this new covenant that he's established as the fulfillment of all these other covenants that came before, to sharing of this bread that he gives us. So, let us not take that lightly, but let us celebrate that well as we celebrate that tomorrow with Holy Thursday. The many layered meaning and significance of what we commemorate tomorrow. Through the holy sacrifice of the Mass, through the Eucharist, the bread that Jesus gave to us. Our daily bread. Give us this day our daily bread. Our bread that sustains us, our bread from heaven. That sustains us not just in life, naturally, but supernaturally, for life eternal. Thank you for listening. God bless you. I'm Father Kevin of the parishes of Franklin and Hardin counties. Again, reminder that you can live stream our Holy Week services. Will be available online. Peace be with you, and God bless.